Push Excel was founded in 1975 to further MLK's vision for education. The goal was always to inspire, motivate, and educate while making sure that state, local, and federal funding would be there to make a quality education possible. What he saw convinced him the fight had to move inside, into the classrooms, and into a community that had to demand better.
I am somebody. Excel. Right on.
Welcome back as we explore the mission and future of Rainbow Push Coalition and Push for Excellence.
In order to better understand why these programs work, we need to get behind the scenes to see how Push Excel motivates and mobilizes young people and the communities around them.
Today, for all young people.
The first time a young person walks onto a college campus and suddenly feels that this could be their future, amazing things begin to happen. Horizons expand, self-confidence grows, and opportunities feel within grasp. For the past 21 years, Push Excel has sponsored tours for thousands of students to visit historically Black colleges and universities. These tours show young people what's possible, how to set their goals, and how to achieve them.
Good morning and welcome back. Thank you for joining us here this morning. We'd like to thank you so much for giving of your gift of time. We are excited to share that once again, Push Excel is continuing the work that we are doing relevant to the launching of our critical thinking series entitled Shaping America's Education Agenda. On this day, the focus of our particular event is really on 69 years after Brown versus Board of Education. I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself as Dr. Sonia Whitaker, the National Education Policy Director for Push Excel, and to take this brief moment to allow my distinguished panelists to introduce themselves to you and to share a little bit about the role that they play in their respective organizations. And we will start with the president of Push Excel, Dr. Julianne Malveaux. Good morning, Dr. Malveaux.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Whitaker. And thank you, colleagues, for assembling to talk about Brown. I am an economist, author, president emerita of Bennett College for Women in Greensboro, North Carolina. Additionally, the dean of the College of Ethnic Studies at Cal State LA, where, as you know, 22 states have now weighed in against our very existence. They do not want ethnic studies taught. They do not want critical race theory taught, but we teach it and we do it. I am also, of course, an activist. I could talk about myself all day, but I'm not going to. What I'm going to say is that the meaning and the purpose of this conversation today is to look at Brown as a chink in the armor of segregation. It's simply a chink in the armor. We haven't fixed segregation yet. We haven't fixed racism yet. The fact is that Brown was one step. After Brown, what we saw was legal intransience, racial attitudes. We saw people saying, no, we won't. And our response is, in the words of our great President Barack Obama, yes, we can. And so what we can do is to stay on the footpath of Brown to ensure that every young person has access to a quality education. And that's why we do Push Excel.
Thank you so very much. Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, could you introduce yourself and the role you play within our respective organizations?
I'm glad to be the National Executive Director of Push for Excellence. I started with Push back in the 80s as local legal counsel for Reverend Jackson and for Rainbow Push, or at that time it was Operation Push. Now I became the Executive Director of the Push International Trade Bureau, and then later, where I am now, I was National Executive Director of Operation Push when Reverend Jackson ran for president in 84 and 88, and a Jackson alternate delegate in 88. And now I'm the National Executive Director of Push for Excellence. And I serve at the pleasure of Dr. Julianne Malveaux at the Board of Trustees. And I am too an activist.
Very good. Thank you so much. Dr. Karat.
Good morning, Dr. Whitaker. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be with this amazing group. I'm a huge proponent of everyone on the panel and a huge supporter of Push Excellence. It's really pushing me to continue to do the great work we're doing in Peoria, Central Illinois. I'm superintendent there. We have 13,000 kids and 27 schools. The majority of them are Black and brown kids from marginalized communities. So we are, yes, race, place, and income. It does continue. We have a long, long way to go. It does continue to play a role in access to quality education for our kids. And we're all part of the solution. We're all responsible for solving this because our kids all deserve a chance for high expectation and strong instruction. So I'm just really happy to be part of this discussion. I'll focus a lot on solutions and some of the things that we're doing in my district as it relates to reimagining the work, and I'll share some of that. I'm excited about the upcoming school year and opportunities for our kids. We're seeing some improvement, but I'm one of those leaders, and I know we'll probably touch on that, but I'm one of those leaders. I'm sick and tired of where we are, and I'm like, this is not acceptable. Let's think outside the box and try this and try that, and we're pushing, and that's what we're doing in Peoria.
Thank you so very much. Mr. Rufus Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Whitaker, and good morning. Good morning to this distinguished group that you've assembled. I am a public school student. I went through public schools my entire life here in Chicago. Went to college at a public university as well, an HBCU, Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Happy to have come back and done a number of things here with the profession, beginning as a CPA, but I also ultimately became the president of the Board of Education for the city of Chicago, the third largest school district in the nation. In doing so, I was somewhat startled by the fact of the population, the number of students in our schools versus the number of people in our city. Then looking at the demographics of that, seeing how few white students and how few Asian students were in our schools versus the number that were in our city. And really looking and understanding the 69th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education, thinking about what was meant when it was passed, the idea that our children could actually do better if we had similar resources to white children, and recognizing that here we are now in 2023, 69 years later, and seeing that we not only have, we don't no longer have segregated schools, we have segregated school systems, and looking at where our children are and how far the difference continues to be between them is really one that continues to be of concern as it was when I headed up our schools. On the other side, I'm also a radio talk show host. I host WVON every morning from 6 to 9 a.m. So we have the opportunity to talk to a number of people and talk about a number of issues all across the country, of which education still remains the core issue, I think, for all of us, because it is the bridge that gets us out of poverty and on to the next things. And so this really emphasis on having resources, having adequate resources, having resources that allows us to truly compete has been one that has been daunting since Brown was passed on May 17th of 1950.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. And Dr. Ackerman.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of such a distinguished group of people. I am a retired K-12 educator. I spent 35 years in public education as a teacher, as a principal, as a curriculum director. And so I have certainly had the opportunity not only to work in inner city, but to work in affluent suburbs as well. This, however, is my 23rd year of retirement. And since I have been retired, I have been involved in a number of activities that began when I was working. I had the honor of serving as the 8th president of the National Alliance of Black School Educators, which I am here representing today. Having been the 8th president, the second woman to serve in that capacity, I have continued to be involved in NABCE since my very first meeting in 1977. Currently, I am serving as the chair of the Legislative Priorities Committee. And so some of the legislative attacks that are occurring as it relates to public education are of great concern to me. I've also had, of course, the opportunity to serve as a university trustee at a public university, my own undergraduate alma mater, Ohio University. Had the opportunity to serve statewide as a member of the Ohio Board of Regents. And so education is sort of what I do. And because I don't have sense enough to just go home and sit, I stay involved in all of these things that matter. I was a little girl in elementary school when Brown versus the board was passed. And so I have lived this 69 years and then some, and have lived it from a variety of different perspectives. So I look forward to the discussion we're going to have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to start out by asking Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, can you talk with us about Brown versus Board of Education from a legal perspective and historical perspective?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for convening this panel. I think that we have misinterpreted Brown across the years. Many people believe that Brown was decided so that we might desegregate the schools and to integrate them and make sure that our students would attend school with children of other races. The real fundamental premise of Brown was that we had to desegregate the resources of the school systems where Black children found themselves, because it did not make sense for Linda Brown to go across the railroad tracks to a school that had better books, better teachers, better resources, academic resources, than to simply just have them at her school. And so this whole idea of the later years after 1954, we got into the whole busing issue, because basically the majority schools, the white schools did not want Black children bused to them. They did not want to integrate the schools, nor did they want to have separate and equal institutions. They were very comfortable having Black schools have books that were outdated and had been abused by the majority schools, just send them to the Black children. So when Thurgood Marshall, Attorney Thurgood Marshall and his team, they came up with this whole legal theory that talked about what happens when schools do not have, students do not have the benefit, the cultural exchanges, the benefit of understanding different cultures and different races, in as much as those existed in America. And they talked about the trauma that it had on children of color in particular, how we were being indoctrinated a certain kind of way. And then after the 1954 decision, there became this whole move to desegregate the schools and move the children to better school systems, better school districts, better school buildings, where they didn't have to desegregate the resources. They never wanted to desegregate the resources and allocate the appropriate resources, the equal resources, to the schools that were predominantly Black. And so what you have today is pretty much what we had 69 years ago. We have Black schools. We have the right to go to other schools, but they're not in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood schools, and Rufus Williams, who I used to work for at CPS, he knows full well how our schools in the inner city neighborhoods that were Black and brown, we had different access to materials, to books. They were not as up to date. Our laboratories have not been invested in years. If you look at, until they build new schools, you have schools that are high schools that are predominantly African American. don't have the same resources allocated, funds to them. And we also discovered after Brown had been decided that the schools were funded based on class, not just race. And so students who attend schools in more affluent school districts like Barrington and Neuqua Valley, they have greater resources allocated per student. The teachers get paid more per student. You know that, Dr. Whitaker, because you worked in a majority school district.
Reverend Wilson, I think one of the things that we have to deal with, and forgive my interruption, but we have to deal with also the issue of Brown too, because Brown itself said separate, whatever it said. You're the lawyer, I'm not. But basically, after that, Brown too said with all deliberate speed, which means take your own sweet time. So I ended up, because I got put out of too many schools in San Francisco, I ended up in Moss Point, Mississippi. Please don't, my mama just sent me there because she couldn't deal with me.
I understand.
That's not nice. But, I had an auntie who was, she died in 2000 at 101 years old. So she had been through all of this, just like Dr. Ackerman. She's seen everything. The year that I went down there, 1969, as opposed to integrating the schools, they sent the Black teachers to the white schools and the white teachers to the Black schools. And that was called integration. And meanwhile, this means everybody had educational disruption, because how do you send, I don't do K through 12, y'all, I stay away from K through 12, but how do you have different rotating teachers on different days to equalize access to teachers without providing access to students? So I went to Magnolia High School, which was a Black high school. Moss Point High School was a white high school. And there was a significant difference in what was available to students, including books we got that said the N-word in them, that had pages torn out, whatever. Praise the Lord, they let me go to college after the 11th grade. Otherwise, I'd still be in trade school. But the bottom line here is that people play games with our education. If you look at Virginia and the Johns case, played games with our education because 1840, North Carolina, to teach a slave to read is to excite dissatisfaction to the detriment of the general population. That was a law in North Carolina. To take that law further, it said that if a white person taught a Black person to read, they could be fined up to $500, which today would be about 50 grand, or flogged. But if a Black person taught a Black person to read, they could lose their freedom. So our education is central to our freedom. And that's the thing that we have to own, When people do not vote, they yield the right to have a say in their education. When we don't show up, when we don't do curriculum, I'm living with this every day.
So let me do this, Dr. Malvo, because I think you hit on a good point. I'd like to ask Mr. Williams and then Dr. Ackerman and Dr. Desmond Karat to weigh in on this, to add value to this, and with the focus on what is Brown versus Board of Education from a historical perspective, as you see it.
There are a couple of things that I'd like to add. First of all, Dr. Malvo, Moss Point, Mississippi. Devin Booker went to high school in Moss Point, Mississippi. So you're the second person I hadn't even heard of. You're the second person that I know.
It's called Mississippi, goddamn.
I knew you were gonna get it in.
Eddie Glaude is also from Moss Point, Mississippi.
Wow, so something's going on in Moss Point. Certainly something's coming out of it.
The whole state of Mississippi.
Well, when we think about Brown, and Dr. Malvo, thank you for introducing Brown 2 as well, because when Brown 1 was done, it was done and nobody did anything. And so they went back before the Supreme Court to say, this needs to be implemented, where the decision was made, as you said, to do it with all deliberate speed, which Thurgood Marshall explained what that means is SLOW. And we look now thinking about it 69 years later. And the idea behind Brown was truly to integrate schools, to integrate public schools. What we did get was the integration of public facilities. And so now we can go to any restaurant we want, we can go to any hotel we want, we can do all those things because that integration happened. But the integration of schools, the sharing of resources, the elevation of Black children into other schools simply didn't happen. I mentioned basketball, and I'm also reminded of the game that took place earlier this week with Boston and Miami. And I have a hard time cheering for Boston because I can't get out of my mind the pictures I saw busing back in the 70s when all those hateful people were keeping Black children from going to schools that would give them better resources. So when we think about the historical context of Brown, what was supposed to happen and where we are now, when we truly look at how our schools are composed, and we look at the proliferation of the suburbs, in many cases where people moved out, simply so they did not have to send their white children to schools with Black children. And we see in our larger urban systems where we don't have integrated schools, and where I go back to where I began at the beginning, we have segregated school systems, which makes it almost impossible to have integrated schools.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for adding value. Dr. Ackerman.
Well, I think that the whole notion of the lack of equity as it relates to the resources is, of course, a key factor here. If you don't have the funding to do the things that need to be done, obviously they cannot happen. And I guess there's a lot more that could be said about that. But in the face of that, I'm wanting to focus on some different things. I'm wanting to focus on the fact that despite that lack of resources, we are people who make a way out of no way. And when we think about the number of people that have been educated because there were people who were willing to make a way out of no way to make sure that Black children got educated. Yes. I don't want us to lose sight of who we are as a people, because going forward, it is that kind of commitment that we have as a people that allow us to overcome the effects of something that happened that we thought was permanent when it was really temporary.
Well, but I think, and I know we have one more person that needs to weigh in. I think we really have to understand that Brown systemically was never designed. The intent of Brown, the lawsuit, was designed to desegregate resources. But as it was interpreted by the white legal scholars in 1954 and years afterwards, when they came back with Brown 1, Brown 2, it was like, take your time to figure this out because we're not clear on what we're supposed to do. And they have not yet become clear. The schools are still the same way they were, and we've stopped fighting. That's the difference.
Yeah.
Even more than that, we have never assessed what we lost in the aftermath of Brown. In Moss Point, Mississippi, teachers lost their jobs. Principals lost their jobs.
Yeah.
Because they were willing. Auntie was a member of the NAACP. One day she gave me her NAACP, and this was happening in Louisiana and Alabama. We were penalized for being fighters. And Dr. Ackerman can certainly speak to this far more clearly than I can. I know our other sister has not had the opportunity to weigh in, but we have to look at the economic losses. Teachers were the backbone of our Black middle class, and they were basically excluded. And here we go again. Go to New Orleans, release teachers from the school system. You can go all over the country where Black principals are being released because they dare say something about race. How could a Black person, someone with melanin, not say something about race to a Black child? And so basically what we're seeing is not only an educational loss, but also an economic loss.
Thank you for that. Dr. Correct.
Yeah, so Brown, it's separate and it's separate, right? And it's unequal. And then we have, remember Plessy versus Ferguson, where we were separated and it was equal. And I'm in Peoria, Illinois, Central Illinois. We are very, very, very segregated by design. I mean, I am the urban school, I'm in the city of Peoria, and then the county. Peoria County has 20 school districts. We're the largest school district. And so people just flock and they get to choose, and it's the most segregated school district, one of the most segregated school districts. So Dr. Ackerman was going, it's like, okay, so what are we going to do about this, right? Because it's our status and our condition for the kids, right? It needs significant improvement. So that's where the leadership comes into play. And, we have the teacher shortage. There's so many challenges that we're experiencing. I mean, even right now, Peoria Public Schools, trying to diversify my teaching staff. When I came in 2015, I'm going on my 9th year as superintendent of Peoria Public Schools. When I came in, we had 108 vacancies, right? So what I ended up doing, because I said I'm going to talk about solutions, is we wrote the federal government, fill an application, became a J1 visa sponsor school district, and we can bring in 125 teachers internationally. It's for some people, it's not a popular idea, but it's definitely a temporary fix for 5 years. And so I have teachers from the Philippines, and I have teachers from Nigeria, from Jamaica, a whole bunch of teachers from Africa. And so for us, it's, teaching the whole child. We're talking about retaining, recruiting, qualified and attracting qualified staff, people who love our kids, people who are going to move them, and they're going to provide them with strong instruction, whether it's mathematics. Here's another thing. When I came in, we had like my schools on the south side of Peoria, which is our low-income, marginalized, disinvested communities. Those kids in middle school did not have access to algebra. Now, I have some middle schools where those 8th graders, those 7th graders, 6th graders, they not only do they have algebra, they have geometry. So I'm like, okay, let's look at this. So somebody talked about equity. It was so bad. And every year I'm like, okay, here it is. What are we going to do? They're not ready. They're not ready. You know what we're going to do this year, 23, 24? All of the 8th graders are going to have algebra. We have a plan for it, and they're going to be exposed to it. And there's so many advantages. So we have to be bold, and we got to take that agenda and push it and go for what we want, go for what we think our kids deserve. And it's the same thing for reading as well. I'll stop there.
Let me ask you this question. I'll ask Dr. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Ackerman, I'll start with you. Dr. Leslie Fenwick states in her book, Jim Crow's Pink Slip, The Untold Story of Black Teacher and Principal Leadership. She says that the displacement of Black principals constituted a painful and unfair loss of talent to the nation's schools. I want to talk about what school districts are doing to address that, but ask you to weigh in on whether or not you have a tendency to agree with that statement, again, that the displacement of Black principals constituted a painful and unfair loss of talent to the nation's schools.
Well, absolutely. You would have to say that the loss of Black educators at any point in time, certainly as it relates to access to Black children, would be a major loss. But when you look at this from a broader perspective, I'm really struck by the fact that there are 13,000 plus public school districts in America. Black children only go to school in less than 500 of the 13,000. And so since we know where we are, being solution oriented is where it is, I believe we have to take the discussion. Yes, at this point, Black educators are only 5% of the teaching force in America. So it means that, what Dr. Carroll has said is wonderful. We're talking about allyship. We're talking about being able to utilize the resources that are available and to work with people who are willing to teach our children. We can't win the numbers game, There's not enough people going into education for us to be able to get enough Black educators to adequately educate Black children. But we've got to find those people who are willing to teach them and to teach them at an ultimate level.
And you know,
Dr. Ackerman, that I think we also need to do, we have created bonuses for teachers when they've gone into difficult areas, when they're teaching certain things. We ought to create some bonuses. And y'all, like I said, I do higher ed, I don't do K through 12. But what if we actually said in high risk school districts, there were bonuses involved in teachers who made a commitment to be there 3 years, 5 years, to basically get with the community, because teachers are not just teachers, they're also community leaders. And when you have a teacher who taught me, then taught my baby sister, then taught my baby brother, they have a relationship. The other thing I want to say, Dr. Ackerman, to your point, when we talk about the allyship, we can never forget what Black teachers who were in the South in the 50s, 60s, and 70s did to teach our young people. My two aunties used to come to UCLA every summer to get their little 6 units so they could get their master's. It took them forever to get it. I remember saying to my mom, is she ever gonna get her master's? But the fact is that once she got it, not only did she get a little pay bonus, but she got a little upgrade. But there were so many Black teachers who did that. And they still weren't paid equally, but they were paid and their education was enhanced. And so just in the spirit of Brown, even as we talk about today, Sister Peoria, we also have to talk about yesterday and that which has been given and that which has been sacrificed. I don't want to simmer in the past. Well, the past, the Sankofa bird says, go back and get it. Go back and get it so you know what's going on. And what we have to go back and get is what Dr. Ackerman has said is a commitment to educational excellence, which is something
I think Dr. Melba, I agree with you and Dr. Ackerman. However, when Rufus Williams, and he can talk more about this, was chair of the board of CPS, what we found then and still continues is the majority K-12 leadership, they're doing what our superintendent from Peoria is suggesting. They're not getting Africans or people of color. They are recruiting, they have this Brogue program to produce administrators. It take you 1 year to become a school administrator. Isn't that right, Dr. Rufus?
1 year?
One or 2, you can go to Brogue program, you read certain
like
books.
Lottie Dottie and everybody can become an administrator?
They are producing superintendents. And many of our people are not enrolling in the Brogue program. We have not created our own training module to produce high quality educators for our schools. A lot of people are not going back into the school system for other reasons, the pay and the response of the students. And so we do have to have some incentives and have a program where we are intentionally teaching culturally relevant pedagogy so that they can teach Black and Brown children.
And speaking of, go ahead, Mr. Williams, and then Dr. Carra.
I want to come back to your initial point and Dr. Ackerman's answer as it relates to principals and leadership, because leadership matters in these schools. And I had the wonderful opportunity to have as my first principal, Dr. Barbara Sizemore. And when Dr. Sizemore back in 1961 developed our school, and this is soon after Brown versus the board, her position was very clear. We don't need to integrate in order to educate our children. We need to do is to make sure that we educate them as they are, where they are, and elevate them. And so right there in the heart of one of the toughest communities in the city was this school that opened under Dr. Barbara Sizemore's leadership, where we did have different tracks and paths where we could come through and really excel at the ways in which we could. She was very unapologetic about what she was doing, how she was doing it, and when she was doing it, because the leadership did in fact matter. When Brown came through, and obviously the Black schools were not as resources to white schools, so the movement came for Black children to go to white schools. We lost a lot of white of Black principals, we lost a lot of Black teachers. We lost a lot of our culture and the ways in which those things happen. But the main point that I want to make is simply leadership matters, and having Black principals as a center of the enterprise makes a lot of difference with what happens inside of that building.
And I'll add to your integration idea. It's the research shows that, you know, it does make a difference in terms of outcomes, but it ain't gonna happen. If we look at our demographics, we might as well just kiss it goodbye. And so I agree with you, Dr. Williams. We need to work with what we have, love our kids. And I respect everybody on this panel. I mean, you guys are my role models, but you know, they move the ball all the time, you know, so we're going back to Brown, right? And then it's a funding issue. Like Peoria, we're tier 1. So we are high, very, very high poverty, underfunded. And so we're receiving the ESSA funds, and Illinois had to, you know, they had to, the evidence-based funding, we received some additional supports there because of our population. And then, you know, folks, they're moving out to the affluent neighborhoods. So, you know, we just have to work with what we have. And I respect obviously Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. That was historical, groundbreaking, even with all of the deliberate speed and the time that it took. And I mean, we've benefited from it. And well, maybe we need a Brown 3, but we do have a.
Not going to get it from this Supreme Court. We will not get anything educational for Black people from this Supreme Court, and we need to be real clear about that. And so, what has to happen, people, is while we care about education, we're educators, but we also have to care about voting. Who are the people who are dealing with educational policy? What do they think, and what are they saying about our people? Over 1,600 books have been banned. Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Nikki Giovanni, books banned. In Texas now, they will not have DEI used. You cannot say diversity, equity, or inclusion in Florida. I'm just losing, or in Texas rather. Florida hadn't gotten there yet, but they'll get there soon.
Yeah, but Florida banned that AP African American Studies class, which I'm proud of. We're going to be implementing that next year. We're one of the pilot
well, that is high schools. But they have, I'm losing a faculty member to the University of Florida who got a letter in writing that said you cannot use the words diversity, equity, or inclusion in your classroom. I'm like, the brother teaches Chicano studies. So how in the whatever is he going to be able to teach his classes? Basically, there is a war on intelligence. There is a war on history. And basically, education is an antidote to ignorance, but that means that we have to push it as hard as we can, as often as we can, and we have to start talking to parents, because too many parents it hasn't trickled down to them. If you don't vote, you'll get lottie-dottie anybody to be on your school board. Brother William will attest to that, I'm sure. When you put the Ramases on the school board, you're going to get books banned for nothing and ignorance running around. It really is a crisis situation. And Brown offers us a tableau to talk about it, but it really is, as Sister, I keep calling you Sister Peoria because I can't pronounce your last name.
That's fine.
What Sister Peoria has really raised is, you know, what do we do next?
So let me ask you, go ahead, Dr. Ackerman.
Well, I wanted to speak about two things that were raised by others on the panel. I believe Mr. Williams brought up Barbara Sizemore. And of course, you know, we have to have just a moment when we raise that name.
Yes.
But I wanted to indicate another historical fact. The nation was more committed to trying to address the inequities that were impacting Black and Brown people up until 1983. Between 1954 and 1983, there was more of an effort to do these things. But in 1983, when the Reagan administration issued A Nation at Risk, the focus shifted from equity to economic competition. And the conclusion was sort of raised that these urban schools really weren't in a position to compete and to provide students who could compete. Well, in 1984, NAPSE, the National Alliance of Black School Educators, created a report that was created for the express purpose of reacting to a nation at risk. And that task force was headed by none other than Barbara Sizemore and Asa Hilliard. And those two individuals helped NAPSE to publish Saving the African American Child. And the whole notion of academic and cultural excellence is what they offered in response to a nation at risk. So fast forward to what do we do in order to make sure that those teachers who are available to teach our children understand what cultural competence is. NAPSE will be launching its National Teacher Institute in June of 2024. And it will be targeting in particular those educators that are not us, those educators that do not look like us, but are committed to teaching our children and making sure that we equip them in ways that will allow them to be more successful with our children.
So let me ask, so that leads into a question that I posed, you've trying to adjust it, which is, do you have to be a Black teacher to contribute to the intellectual development of Black students? I'd like
no.
Yeah.
You have to be culturally competent. You have to be racially sensitive. You do not have to be Black, as I think that one of y'all said. You know, we can't win the demographic game, but the fact of the matter is, if you want Black children to learn, you cannot put idiots in the classroom with them. And I say that because I recall having to get on an airplane and fly to Atlanta because some idiotic white girl told my godchild that the South won the Civil War. And the child at the time was 6 or 7. He had spent enough time with me to call the teacher a liar. Well, he probably shouldn't have called her a liar, but whatever. He spent enough time with me. But at the end of the day, I got on an airplane and took that baby girl back to school. I'm like, oh, how dare you? What is this? So we don't want people who are ignorant teaching our young people. There have to be culturally competent measures to see. A white person, an Asian, anybody can teach. The question is what they plan to teach and how it fits in with reality. And the fact is that there's a narrative right now that is repugnant, that essentially is rejecting reality. All these Civil War figures with their statues all over the place, why? You know, all these books that basically tell lies, why? Banning our books, banning Alice Walker, come on now. Why? So you don't have to be Black, but you have to have some sense. And if you don't have any sense, you don't need to be teaching.
And one of the terms
that principals and administrators have a key role to play in how they vetting and screening the people who come to their schools.
Mr. Williams, I want to add value, and then I'm going to pose a question to Dr. Karat, a direct question. Mr. Williams.
Just say, I was going to just say, doctor, and doctor can be all of you all, or any of you, since you all are. But, you know, the notion of banned books and the fact that that is happening and eroding and erasing history is one of the things that was fought so hard for in the 60s when we started looking at what Black studies and Black study programs were. And what really troubles me in this moment is how we generally are sitting idly by as these bans are happening. Whether it's in Florida, whether it's in Texas or any place else, where these things are happening, it affects us, it affects Black children, it affects white children, it affects everybody who comes in contact with us because they're not operating with proper history. And somewhere along the way, we have to stop being docile and stop being silent and really push back against this banning that's happening because it's affecting all of us and will affect the education of all children and how we are perceived for years and years to come.
Which leads me to a question relevant to advocacy and how important that is. But before I go there, Dr. Karat, I know we had just a moment ago, each of the panelists referred to the fact that you don't have to be a Black teacher to insist and work toward developing the intellectual capabilities of Black and Brown children, but you do have to possess a very high level of cultural competency. I'd like to pause right there, probably won't surprise you all, right? And ask Dr. Karat to talk about some of the work that you are doing and will continue to do in your respective organization to develop the cultural competencies within your school district.
Yeah, so thanks. We have about 1,000 teachers, and when I came in, about 6% were African Americans, and with this new initiative, we're close to about 10%, and we can get it more. But you know, there's a professor, Dr. Duke. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. We're going to be implementing, piloting this great first aid curriculum, which is amazing. It's for kids who are from underrepresented groups. It has SEL embedded in it. It has a strong parental component. There's project-based learning, and these are for kindergartners, and it's from birth to eighth. So I'm really excited about that. And it's all culturally competently focused. And these are designed by 2 professors, and she has a large team. So this is very, very, very exciting. And of course, the African American studies that we're piloting with College Board, I'm excited about that. My board, 2 years ago, we approved BH 365 Black History 365. So we're teaching that in all of our high schools, and it's in grades 2 through 8 for this coming year. So I'm really excited about that. But yeah, I mean, you know, so what is it? About 90% of my teachers are non-Black teachers. So for me, it's, you know, it's being able to, you love the kids, you understand the kids, you know where they're coming from. I was a middle school principal, a high school principal, primary principal. I'm like, okay, this is who we are. Okay. But Manual was one of the toughest schools downstate. This is who we are. These are who we might get cussed out once in a while. Do you understand, you know, why do you want to teach at my building? And they'll say, hey, I'm for the underdogs. This is where I want to be, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, so I guess I went around and around. I hope I answered your question. But yeah, being able to strengthen relationships with the kids, their families, the community, understanding, being able to embed social emotional, it's a huge thing for us right now. I mean, that's strategy 2 of my strategic plan, embedding, ensuring that every classroom is teaching, you know, that castle components, self-regulation, conflict resolution, self-awareness, because there's a ton of, you know, trauma in our community, and it's impacting classroom, you know, just coming to school and the things that the kids have to go through. I mean, then they've gone, you know, the things that they experience, all those ACEs, adverse childhood experiences that we you know, we're aware of. It's real, and we have a ton of families that are struggling. And Dr. Ackerman, I just loved the little history lesson you gave us regarding Nation at Risk, and how that tied in with NAPSI as well. And I like the direction that it's heading. I'm part of that group. And so if there's anything I can do, if I can get some, I would love to have some teachers go through the training. I would recommend that it be job embedded as well. So it's not just drive by, as Dr. Malvo would say, you know, one and done sort of thing.
So I think,
can I just ask you a quick question? Sonia asked you, Dr. Whitaker asked you a question about the demographic of your teachers, but I'm equally concerned about what we do to grow more Black teachers, especially among Black men.
Thank you.
But what can we do? Because first of all, the salaries are ridiculous, and so you really have to be passionate about it. But it's beyond the salaries, it's some of the barriers in Texas in particular, but other places. They've created barriers to make it impossible almost for Black teachers to qualify. What can we do as activists to get more Black people in the classroom?
So I'm really proud. When I came in, our salaries were like 35. Now, beginning teacher next year, they'll get 50,000, and then a 2,000 sign-on bonus, right? So downstate, we're not, if you compare it to Chicago, cost of living is So, because in Florida, I was in Florida 2 days ago, their salaries are 39,000. So I was really proud of our salaries. We have a Grow Your Own program, and we do it with our PFT, our teachers union, and we've been doing it. It's been implemented since 2015, and and so every year you get about 2 or 3 graduates. It's a slow, then we also have, it's a slow but steady process. And I'm really proud of that. I think we've gotten, and these are non-traditional individuals. They were either teacher aides or secretaries, you know, you name it. And they get in, they get support, they get tutors, they get financial support, they have an affinity group. It's pretty amazing. And so this is one thing that we do. And then we also have a high school Grow Your Own as well. But most of the kids, we're pushing it. They're like, no, I don't want to be a teacher. The kids are too bad. That's what they tell me. But we're pushing. They'll say the kids are too bad. They'll say they are too bad. But go ahead, Dr. Whitaker.
You know, if I could add value to that, for those of you who don't know, I am the newly elected president of the South Suburban Chicago Alliance of Black School Educators, which is an affiliate of NABCE.
Yay!
Excited to share that. And the reason why I share that, and thank you, Dr. Malvo, to your question to Dr. Karat about growing our own in the teacher profession, but I would be remiss if I did not add that with regards to growing our own as it relates to Black principals, I would like to go on the record as saying with regards to SABCE, that is one of our key focuses. The reality is that in our schools, I know in the South suburbs and the like, where we have Black teachers, many of them are qualified and certified to take on the principal, assistant principal, superintendent, and assistant superintendent roles. But the real talk is far too often, they are not being tapped on the shoulder. This is real talk here. They are far too often, they are not being groomed. And if they are being groomed, with all due respect to once a year aspiring superintendents, aspiring principal programs, that's not enough. They've got to be able to rub elbows with us, those of us that lead, and they've got to be able to engage in professional development around topics like advocacy, which is the question that I want to pose in just a minute too. When we have, again, teachers with the credentials to lead, and they don't have exposure, we have to give them exposure, but we have to be clear about what does that exposure look like. Unfortunately, far too many teachers and school administrators went into the profession because they didn't want to deal with politics. But the reality is that politics is in education. And so that leads me to the question that I want to pose to you is, how important is it that educators at all levels of the system embrace the notion that they have to engage in advocacy, and what might that look like?
Well, certainly, I would want to speak to that as the work of NABCE's Legislative Priorities Committee has been focused on 2 things. One is advocacy, and the other is persistence. Advocacy has to focus at the state level. Education is a function of states, and this is where these wars are being waged, in state legislatures. And so if we're going to do anything, first of all, we have to pay attention. We have to act like we care about what is going on. We can't pretend that what's going on love and marriage, and you know, whether or not LeBron is the GOAT or whether it's Michael Jordan. We have other stuff we need to be concerned about. And monitoring these legislatures is the first thing we need to do in order to understand what is happening. The reality is they have the votes in the room to do the things that they are doing. And as long as we do not have people in those rooms who are able to vote our interests, we are going to be at a disadvantage.
Correct.
So allyship becomes so important. We
Mm-hmm.
have got to begin to mobilize allies that can appreciate the issues that are of concern to us. And so that would be what I would say. But I would also say, in terms of the shortage, we know that the HBCUs are the ones who are producing Black teachers. That is a reliable source. We need to be supportive of those efforts because that's actually happening. What is going on in these other states?
It's 5 o'clock.
Essentially, the students who are in education are young white girls. And so we need to understand that that is who is going into education. We've got to go after them and help them become the kinds of teachers that need to be teaching our children.
Yeah, a long time ago,
Dr.
Peoria
Carter, I'm so
Public
glad that you
Schools-
mentioned HBCUs because it is very important, but that really does speak to a policy piece about the underfunding of HBCUs. As a former HBCU president, I can tell you the challenges that we face in terms of funding. Many of the areas where you guys are saying there's shortages like special education, it's almost impossible to get folks not only to teach special education, but to major in it. The historically Black colleges and universities, again, have been the backbone for the Black middle class throughout all of our lives, the backbone. However, increasingly, there's some people in our community who believe the white man's ice is colder. And because they believe the white man's ice is colder, they're not necessarily encouraging our young people to pursue education at HBCUs. But I'm gonna tell you, the blacker the college, the sweeter the knowledge. You will learn at an HBCU. And what you will learn is how to deliver culturally competent education. So we can't, there are people who did not go to HBCUs. I didn't. I just happened to lead one. But, and if I had gone to an HBCU, I'd be a much nicer person than I am today. Because I had to fight for everything I got in white land. But the fact is that anybody, whether you went to an HBCU or not, you must be an advocate for HBCUs, for equal funding for HBCUs, for equal opportunity for HBCUs, for our children to have access to our HBCUs. And so, Doctor, I want to thank you so much for raising one of my passions, which is just how we get our HBCUs to be more efficient and how we can get them through the federal system. And I'll give Biden credit. I'll give him a little credit. I call him Brother Biden when he behaves. And Brother Biden has done well by HBCUs. And so we do appreciate that, but we need more. Maryland, Mississippi, you can go down the states that have systematically discriminated against our HBCUs.
And I'll say, years ago in the 60s, Dr. Whitaker, Peoria Public Schools went to Lane College, right? And they brought back like 15 Black teachers. That's where they got, and some of them have just passed away. Miss Timms, Miss Jackson, Dr. Wortham. Some of them are still around, retired for many, many years. And we've done a lot of work with HBCUs, but here is the thing. It depends on the state. It depends on your location. Most of those young people, it's like, okay, what does Peoria have to offer, right? So they have lots of options, you know, between Miami, between Texas, California, all these other states. So, and then we also know that not as many and we've already talked about that, not as many individuals are getting into education. So it's the pool is so small and so competitive.
I'm gonna ask you a really ignorant question. Do they still have a Klan in Peoria?
Yes. Yes. They got it all.
You're talking about David Duke.
Well,
Probably.
Peoria was known for its Central Illinois Klan back in the day. I was hoping it was gone, but I'll just have to, since we have.
I don't know. I don't know. It might be undercover. Who knows?
No, they're not undercover.
Williams, would you add value to the conversation, please?
So Dr. Wilson,
Thank
I've been getting you for a while, so I'll defer to her because I know she's.
Okay.
I'll defer to you and then I'll come right behind you.
Yes.
I'll
I
simply
have
say,
a lot to say.
I'll say a couple of things. Dr. Ackerman made notion of a point that we really need to own. And on all she said, what she told us is that we have to be woke. And when we start to really think about what some of the knowledge, some of the conversation is now about anti-wokeness, what you explained, Dr. Ackerman, is that we need to be woke. We need to be awake. And we need to know and be engaged and involved about what all these things are. The advocacy at the state level is really important. We pushed a lot and pushed hard when we got President Obama in the White House and thought, we good, except the fact of the matter is they were really pushing hard on all these state legislatures, and we're seeing the impact of that now throughout this country. And unless we pay particular attention, and Dr. Malvo noted very early in this conversation about voting, unless we pay very particular attention about those things, we'll find ourselves consistently behind.
Yeah.
I want to go back and just touch on teachers and getting more teachers, and particularly getting more Black male teachers. I think we talk about this as a teacher, but we don't talk about it as a profession. And the profession leads you up the chain to where you all can be, to where you all got to, who are here on this call. But when we talk about teacher, you only see it in a classroom. When you talk about the profession, then you see the ways in which you've really moved this thing. And we have to look at it in that way. It's not something, as being the only Black male on this call, I never considered it. It may have been what Brown opened up for all of us, so we had opportunities to do a lot of other things. But if we think about it as a profession, and we are really particular about what we're trying to do, the University of Illinois Chicago has a very particular program to get Black males into the education field. Teach for America was very good in drawing people in and saying, this is a start. You go into a classroom for 2 years, but you stay somewhere in education. And I think a number of our other organizations can do a lot more with really being very specific about going to young Black men and talking to them about the profession of education and what that means. And then if we're deliberate in what we're trying to do, then we'll see the outcomes that we're seeking.
Brother, I got to say one quick thing to you before.
No, you don't get to go before me this time.
You said woke. I don't care about woke. I care about what you do when you get out of bed. See, people use the term woke.
How did she jump back in?
Jump back in. You don't need. I mean, it's not just woke. People use that term very loosely. It's what do you do when you get out of bed? Are you an activist? Are you making a difference? There you have it.
I think we kind of gloss past a lot of things. First of all, education is a state's right. It's not a federally protected right. And so when Dr. Malvo said earlier, we got to focus on voting, teachers and our professional organizations do not focus on these elections, particularly these legislative races. All your money is dictated by state legislatures, as well as how the schools will be operated, who's going to be in charge of the public schools. We do not teach civics to our teachers and our educators and our administrators. We operate schools as if everything is fine. Administrators making X number of dollars, teachers are making X number of dollars. In every school district, the administrators make 4 times the average teacher is going to make. And so that creates a schism, and I'm not saying you don't deserve it, between you and the teacher. An engineer in Chicago public schools will make more than a beginning teacher will make. We have to fight against that. An engineer does not have to have any education, doesn't have to go to any special program necessarily, just get in the union. And we've had, and that's around the country, you have janitors and engineers making more than classroom teachers. So why would I want that profession? Number one. Number two, as we look at the system, professional development has to take a new turn. I have taught at every grade level. Our teachers and many of our administrators are not in the 21st century. Many of them have computers sitting on their desks. The children are operating with cell phones, doing more than the teacher can teach them. And so they're not progressing as their students are in terms of the level of technology that they have access to. So we have to, all of our organizations, the NAPSI and other professional organizations have to focus on that. Our US senators make certain decisions about education, and we don't even focus on what is your educational agenda, whether it's in the state legislature, whether it's in the US Senate. We have to make sure that these people are operating on our agenda. We should have legislative days in Springfield, in Florida. DeSantis will not have the power that he has in these, especially in the southern states, Mississippi, Florida. It's more of us than it is of them. We're not voting, we're not focused, and we're not, so we have to organize and advocate. Brown has never been achieved, and it's because we're no longer fighting. I was looking at the presidents that were in the White House from 54 to now. You had Eisenhower in 54, You had Lyndon Johnson in the 60s. You had Carter. You had Reagan. You've had two Bushes and Clinton. We have to look at what happened in education federally. What was the focus in each of those presidential years? As we look at 2024, we got to be real focused on not just doing civics for children. We need to do civics for our educators so they understand their role. You know, these teacher unions that are run by white people and they put Black faces up that don't fight for culturally responsive teaching. And you can't teach what you don't know. Black teachers don't know the cultural history. They're not fighting for Black books by Black authors, because I'm finding, and I don't know if the rest of you are finding this, you start naming some books by Black authors, the teachers haven't read it either. Caste, The Warmth of Other Suns. And so,
Well, you know what, Jeanette? Here at Cal State LA,
we need a list.
We have started a K through 12 pedagogy program where teachers can come and get 12 units, so they will be certified to teach ethnic studies. Because in the state of California, you must have ethnic studies to get out of Cal State. You must have ethnic studies to get out of community college. By 2030, you must have ethnic studies to get out of high school. So who gets to teach ethnic studies? And what I found in my little bit of time here is that there's some hustlers who think they can teach ethnic studies because they have 2 lines about Toni Morrison in a poetry class. Not. And so, of course, your favorite fighter is like, oh, you know what not. I didn't say it all. You should give me congratulations, send me some flowers, because I didn't say it all. But in any case, what we basically are doing is attempting to create a space to train teachers, no matter what their race or ethnicity, to teach ethnic studies. They will have to take a class in ethnic studies pedagogy. They will have to take a class in Pan-African studies, Chicano Latino studies, and Asian American studies. They will leave this 12-unit program equipped to teach ethnic studies, which in the state of California is required. But there needs to be more of this. Of course, y'all can come from all over the country to Cal State LA and enroll in this program. But the fact is that there is a woeful ignorance of history. I mean, you don't have to have Alice Walker and Toni Morrison. Just go back to Lerone Bennett and From Slavery to Freedom to talk about what's going on. I mean, it amazes me how many people do not know. Even like we just passed Memorial Day. Black people started Memorial Day.
Absolutely.
Memorial Day was a Black thing that somehow got erased, but our erasure is systematic, because if you can erase us, then you can basically denigrate us, redefine us, and put us down. So y'all,
we're content to be erased.
But sisters, do me one favor.
Obviously
Let's stop using the terms white supremacy. Let's call it white delusion. Because when we call it white supremacy, we concede to them that they're supreme. Let's just call it white delusion, because these are some deluded people who, if you look at the post-Reconstruction era, what Black people did, the colleges we established, the land that we only own 10% of the land that we owned in 1890. 10%. They kept taking it. So please just do me one favor. I know y'all probably think I talk too much. I do. Don't use a term white supremacy. Use white delusion, so that we put them back to where they belong.
Let me just make a statement about Californian ethnic studies. That's wonderful. But the reality is that there are more than 40 states that have this very regressive legislation either enacted or in process.
22 states have passed legislation. 22 states have passed it. 18 more have it on their books. Yes.
Right. And so we are at a very critical point in our existence as a people. And we need to get very, very serious about where this is, because the votes are in those rooms.
Absolutely. But you remember, you were a Jackson delegate. We did a Southern crusade through 11 Southern states where we're the majority of the population. And that's how Reverend didn't win the presidency, but he changed the minds of several people, and he caused people to run for office. SB in Mississippi and
Thousands. You could go down
just across those. If you took the 11 southern states, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, we have the power. We're not using our power, and so we allow. Like in Tennessee, it's more people, Black people in Tennessee, than those two young men that got elected. And I was so happy to see them fight. We got to fight.
And we're
Teachers
not
have to
fighting.
fight.
Reverend used to always say the same hands that pick peaches can pick presidents. That was Reverend has said that so many times. The same hands that pick peaches can pick presidents, a delegate. But what I want to say about that is Reverend has been tireless in talking about voting, but why haven't we heard the message? And for teachers, I mean, there are a whole bunch of things I can't tell y'all that I do that are not legal, but I do something every day that's illegal. It's just kind of like my mantra. Then they got to investigate. They fight it. They will. If they don't, they won't. But the bottom line is anybody who is a teacher who is not involved in politics is not a teacher. They're a wuss. And if anybody,
okay. Dr. Whitaker, take it.
Yes, we wanted to add value, and then I want to pivot us for closing. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Dr. Whitaker, I'm sorry. I
was
missed
going to say, we wanted to have you add value from your perspective, and then I'm going to pivot the conversation toward closing remarks.
So
did I spark that closing?
On the conversation of voting, we still have to strategically get ahead of everything. And so what we have seen over time in all of these places where we voted and come out has been this whole issue of gerrymandering. Mm-hmm. So we can go, but we still don't get the power that we need to get because the maps have been drawn in such a way that dilutes us. And so we've got to continue to we got to get ahead, and we got to be smarter than the others are that continue to push us back as we try to move through these things. Dr. Malveaux, when you talked about the need for money for HBCUs to really have the resources that we need, you just brought us right back to Brown versus the Board of Education 69
Absolutely.
Years. We still are not getting what we should get. And it matters. It makes a difference in us not having those resources and trying to figure out ways we don't need to sit in there, white people, but we do need to have the resources that we need to adequately do the work that we're all trying to get done.
We need the labs. I don't need to sit next to them. Nobody does. But we need the labs. We need the resources. We need the AI, high-tech classrooms that many of our schools don't have. And when we try to retrofit, we're going backwards because we're 10, 20 years behind in the technology. And why are we behind in the technology? Because of systematic underfunding of our HBCUs, systematic underfunding. And ain't nobody shamed, ain't nobody scared. They think they can do this because it's okay. What we need, and I'm tired of middle-class Black people who want to be respectable. Because respectable is one thing, but you got to be ready to put your fists together and fight this stuff and get people out to vote and call them on the word I ain't gonna say, because Jeanette will have another fit. But call them on.
Let me say this. Thank you for that, Dr. Malveaux. I think some of what you said is awesome in terms of where we want to go with our closing remarks. For summary, I would like to thank our viewing audience for paying close attention to the content that we've shared, and then summarize that and suggest that what you've heard us talk about this morning is the importance of advocacy, the importance of recognizing that even if you have gone into the teaching or administrative profession because you did not like politics, the reality is that there's no way to escape that, and you have to advocate. The other point that we touched upon amongst many is the need for educators. 69 years after Brown versus Board of Education, we already know that in many of America's schools, they are as segregated today as they were then. With that being said, as a panel, we all agree that you don't have to be a Black teacher to provide for high quality academic and social experiences for Black and Brown children, but you do have to possess a very high level of cultural competence. We also have discussed the importance of recruitment efforts and provided for you some strategies and creative ways for how to recruit teachers that better reflect the diversity that exists within your school district. I'd like to, in closing remarks, start with Dr. Ackerman and then Mr. Williams and Ms. Wilson, as well as Dr. Malvo in that order, and Dr. Karat, to provide two things for our viewing audience. One, 1 minute closing remarks, followed by your recommendations for the statement that you have rendered on this international broadcast. Dr. Ackerman.
Well, certainly, our work is not over. The work that we have to do is so critical to our future as a people. And in order for us to get really, really serious about this, we need to look back at the examples that have been set for us. It is hard for me to imagine that people like A. Philip Randolph and Daisy Bates and all those folks that led the civil rights movement did what they did with mimeographs and party phone lines and bus transportation. That's how they function. And we are operating as if we don't know what to do when we have Instagram, TikTok. We've got all of these things available to us and we can't seem to get together. So I want us to be very, very serious about the fact that we as a people are letting ourselves down, and we need to get real with ourselves about the future of our children and our people.
Thank you very much. Mr. Williams.
Dr. Whitaker, this is a critically important conversation. And on May 17th of 2024, we will acknowledge the 70th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education. And we'll recognize then that it is a promise that is broken and is not going to be fulfilled. We will have to on our own recognize that the integration of schools will not happen, but we do have to get to the equity of resources and the equity of teaching and the equity of understanding of our young children and those around us to ensure that we are good, full, and humanized as we move forward. It is important to continue to acknowledge these moments. It's important to continue to not acknowledge those who have fought for us getting to this point. But in all the things that you summarize, it does tell us we've got a lot of work to do. And in that work, it is to recognize what was to have happened, what has not happened, and how we're going to get from here to the next place, because there is no greater institution in this country than the institution of education. And without that, we will all perish.
Thank you very, very much. Dr. Karat.
Yeah, we have to reignite that African warrior spirit in us. As a people, that's all, we had to fight for everything that we accomplished. And so we can't be lackadaisical, we can't be complacent. There's still a lot of work to do. One of the things that I picked up, a theme, leadership. So we need each and every one to sort of play their part. It's going to take everyone to help improve things for our kids. And advocacy was another theme that came up. And it's very, very important, even as superintendent in my role. I'm part of a huge advocacy group, Advance Illinois. We advocate for additional funding. We were able to get that extra $350 million to fund schools in Illinois. That was a lot of work going to the assemblies, writing letters, sending tweets. So that's very, very important. I started off working at the Urban League, actually, and it was all about advocacy and working with disenfranchised. I spent 10 years working there, and it was amazing, good work. I am motivated by this conversation and the panelists as in my role, to find a way to have a conversation with our Black males, to get them to sort of show them about the teaching profession, the profession of education. And I think I can do that. I think I can get more Black males. I've just been inspired by that conversation, so I'm gonna work on that. And Dr. Malvo and a couple of you also talked about voting, and it's so important. We see the apathy and in our area as well, And what we've done as a school district is our governor actually on election day, it's a holiday, so no one really has an excuse. But we also have our kids who are eligible serving as election judges. They get paid, and we work very closely with NAACP. They come to the schools, they get the children registered. We take them to, we take them to the polls as well. So yeah, this is an area we'll continue to educate our kids about. My board actually is also very, very adamant about it. And I'm always like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And I'll share with them, and they have ideas of their own as well, which we implement. And the last thing, Reverend Williams, Dr. Williams talked about ongoing support, professional development for teachers, working collaboratively with them and using best practices to get this work done. It's not, from the top, it has to be from the bottom up. And we're doing that work with the Algebra for All middle schoolers, and I'm really excited about that. I know teachers, some of them, the seventh grade teachers, where it's going to be accelerated, they're a little nervous about it. But one of the things we also have to do is say, hey, we're going to provide support. It's not, anything negative. It's just, we need to make a difference and expose our kids and do this together. And we're going to get it done together. And it's not, it's not beating people over the head, but it's trying to find ways to provide opportunities for our children.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karat. Dr. Malveaux, closing remarks, and then Dr. Wilson.
As I listen to this very distinguished panel, I want to thank you all for the conversation and for the ideas. As I listen to you all, I'm both inspired and challenged. Inspiration comes from the work that you all are doing, especially you, Dr. Ackerman, with your long history in education. For my brother, Dr. Williams, and the work that you've done. And for my sister, Miss Peoria, that's going to be your name until I mess up. But
I love it.
Who basically has taken it on. And of course, my partner in crime some days she disowns me, Reverend Wilson. But I'm so both challenged and inspired. But what we must know, my Auntie Anna Mae, I referenced her earlier, and I partially referenced her for any number of reasons. We have a family situation. My mother's brother, the last of the siblings, is dying. And I think about Auntie Anna Mae. And she used to always say, if you have education, nobody can take anything from you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She was 101 years when she died. She was still tutoring kids in her house because she believed that education was the torch. Have we lost that? Have we lost that? We do our best at Push Excel. We do our best. I know at the Peoria schools, each of you does your best, but it seems that the passion for education has somehow diminished. We have young people who don't believe in education. How do you not believe in education? But they don't. I have a sibling who's a substitute teacher who told me she sent a girl home for turning her radio on in the classroom. So the mama came back to whip her behind. Said, you can't send my daughter home. Where have we lost that value? Teachers used to be the most revered people in our communities, and we have to restore that. I'm also, among the other things I do, vice chair of the board of the Economic Policy Institute, which studies wages. And what we know about wages is that relative teacher wages have declined. That if we look at it in terms of inflation adjusted, teacher wages have declined. So teachers were once the most valued people in our communities, and now they are among the least. There has to be a movement, not only to lift up our teachers, but to lift up education. And those of us who are educators and who care about this, if we don't do it, we're dropping the ball. And so my passion is about making sure that anyone who wants to be educated has that opportunity, and anybody who doesn't has that forced opportunity. Ignorance is ignorance just doesn't work. And education is the antidote to ignorance. So what do? Everybody, every day, ask yourself, what are you doing? Are you writing a legislator? Are you calling somebody? Are you voting? Are you going to the school and volunteering? It's not a one-man band. All of us can make a difference.
Very good. Wow, that was powerful. Thank you so much, Dr. Malveaux. and Dr. Jeanette Wilson.
Well, Dr. Malveaux said much of what I would have said if she had let me.
Don't mess with
I
me.
just want you, I'm glad to do that. But one of the things that I think Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Malveaux in particular, our convention this year is a call to educators. It's time for you to join us at the convention. This has been 90 minutes of just exposing some of the issues. We must come together, not only wrestle with it, but leave the convention on July the 17th, which is Education Day, with a plan to restore and to restore the energy that Dr. Malveaux is talking about, but we are fighting as a collective. Every parent needs to be involved, parents need to be involved, teachers need to be involved. All of the people that work in schools need to be involved. Community leaders need to be involved. We've got to deal with 69 years after Brown. Our schools are more segregated than ever before. We have fewer African-American teachers than ever before. We have a system that is still intentionally segregated by resources. There's less technology in our African-American schools than ever before. Our teacher training is not at the level that it should be. And so we have to come together and start planning our action, because in 2024, we have a presidential election. Every state legislator will be up for re-election or election in 2024. We must be prepared for the fight is coming, and we must marshal our efforts. You know, advocacy is now, it's not then, it's now. 69 years later, the fight continues for a high quality public education for every child. So join us at the Rainbow Push Convention in July 15th through the 19th. Education Day, if you can only come one day, is July the 17th. And we'll be at the Rubenstein building on the campus of the University of Chicago.
Thank you so very much to my esteemed panelists. In closing, we want to thank you for tuning into this critical thinking discussion focused on 69 years after Brown versus Board of Education. We hope to have raised your consciousness around this topic, and equally important, provided for you recommendations that can be implemented in your respective organization as soon as yesterday. As Reverend Dr. Jeanette has indicated, the Rainbow Push Coalition is once again hosting our annual conference. It will be held virtually. Please visit rainbowpush.org to reserve your seat at the place. Now, whatever you do, do not move, do not touch that dial. We'll be right back, because the push is on.